So next up is Amber Vlangas with Restorative Action Alliance, and he's also one of the founders of the National Coalition Against Conviction Registries, and she will be doing our next presentation. Thank you.
Wow. All right, I guess we have a little bit of a height difference there, so I gotta lower this down a bit. Good morning, everyone. I am so excited to see everyone here this morning, and thank you to everyone who worked so hard to put this conference together. Restorative Action Alliance is so happy to be in community and in collaboration with all of the organizations that stepped up to participate in this. And so this morning, I am going to be focusing on registry abolition and how that is a very critical component of the fight to end sexual violence rather than it being in opposition to it. Because oftentimes people think that these are two separate things, that they are at odds with each other, and I'm here to tell you that that is simply not the case. And this is some of the language that is useful to us in this movement in order to be reaching the hearts and minds of people. And so Janice talked a lot about how long it took to overturn some really bad Supreme Court cases. And just as Janice mentioned, it took a lot of different things. So it took education, it took litigation, it took legislative advocacy. And so we need all of those things in our movement, and we have all of those things in our movement. We have the advocates, we have the lawyers, we have the researchers, we have the artists, we have the people with lived experience, we have allies. So we just need to sort of bring all those people together and move in the same direction, and more we see that happening, and it's really exciting. We definitely need people who have experienced harm to share their stories, and we need to stop pretending that people who've experienced harm are not sometimes the same people who have caused harm. So sometimes we need to address those things differently, but we don't ever need to not allow somebody to process their victimization because they went on to cause harm, or have someone who's caused harm perpetually using their victimization to excuse what they've done. So all of those things can coexist, and this is the way that we will tear down these cycles. So there are some handouts. They're just sort of like some of the key slides, and you don't need to be staring at them right now, but you can take them away with you. But really what we're talking about is a couple of truths that coexist. One is that sexual violence and harm are very serious problems in our society. So we all have to acknowledge this, regardless of the pain that the system has caused us. Because if we don't acknowledge this, then we lose our credibility. Because I don't think that there's anybody in here saying, that's great, let's do that, let's keep doing that. I think this is great for our society. The second truth is that the sex offense registry regime does not decrease sexual harm. In fact, it creates the exact conditions that increase the risks of violence. And we'll talk about what that is. Now, that doesn't mean that if you're on the registry will make you reoffend. So don't misinterpret that. We're going to talk about what the risks of the conditions that cause violence to occur are, and how there are connections to generational harm, generational trauma. So the truth is that sexual violence and harm affects all of us. Over half of women and almost 1 in 3 men experience sexual harm involving physical contact in their lifetime. 1 in 4 women and 1 in 26 men report rape or attempted rape. 20% of women and 8% of men are sexually abused before they ever turn age 18. And we simply don't talk about this. It's under the rug, it's shameful, it's isolation. 1 in 2 gender expansive people, 1 in 2 experience sexual harm in their lifetime. That's an astounding statistic. So when we talk about child sex abuse materials and online sexual exploitation, sexual abuse imagery of children 11 to 13 is actually most prevalent, accounting for almost 7 in 10 instances identified as of 2020. The impact to survivors of CSAM is ongoing because distribution is continual and images are perpetually accessible. And the majority of CSAM producers are parents, guardians, neighbors, or friends, and also sometimes the person themselves, or they've been coerced by an adult to participate in that. In 2021, girls were seen in 97% of CSAM reported and removed by the Global Internet Watch Foundation. So that's all that to say, a lot of numbers thrown around, this and that. This thing is a problem that we do not want in our society. But there are also some problems with perceptions about our responses. So, in fact, most sex crimes are not rape, and I feel like I'm preaching to the choir here because many people are caught up in the system for many different things. Formal law enforcement data does not include the vast majority of sexual harm in this country because it's all about self-reporting. And what do we know about sexual harm? These things are happening in families. The adults are the ones who are self-reporting, and if you are a person who is committing abuse, you're not going to self-report that you are harming a child. We're not asking children. And even if we thought that a law enforcement approach to all of these things, of every 100 committed rapes, so we know that everything is not rape. Of every 100 committed rapes, 40 are actually reported, 10 actually lead to an arrest, 8 people are charged with a felony, and 3 people are incarcerated. So even if you thought this was a solution, we're not even doing it well. So what is happening? There are some important things to acknowledge. Contrary to the pervasive thought, the reoffense rates among people are very low. Again, preaching to the choir, folks in this room know that. So we're really focusing on 3 to 5% of the problem when 95% of folks will not be on a path to reoffense. It's also important to know that systemic bias and disparate treatment based on race, gender, identity, disability, and class sweep people into the criminal legal system and onto conviction registries. So, again, the plethora of experience in this room will tell us that that's true. There are approximately 900,000 people on registries. In our state of New York, it's 44,000. And approximately 35% of those folks were convicted for an incident that happened when they themselves were a child. So we also know that sex exceptionality in our culture and practice has been created by historical ideas and moral panic. So that means, like, if you think about, like, anybody even mentions the word sex, whether it's as far as a crime or anything else, people immediately start, like, getting into this state of mind that makes them, I'm sorry to say, lose their ever-loving mind, right? And so they act in very irrational ways because they're feeling a lack of safety in their body because our culture has created this exceptionality around sex. So now I want to talk a little bit about the drivers of violence. So there are many reasons why people commit violence. And there is no one reason why somebody is going to commit an offense, but there are some things that have been connected to violence in general, including sexual violence. And number one is exposure to violence. So again, we talked about cycles of harm, right? Intergenerational violence. Another one is isolation. Is this feeling familiar to anyone? Isolation. The other is shame. Has anybody ever felt good in their body and in their actions while feeling shame? I don't think so. And then the last one is an inability to meet your economic needs. Is this feeling familiar? So I don't need to tell this group that registry and related sanctions really misunderstand the realities about how most sexual violence occurs, that it fails to prevent sexual harm, and it may even deter disclosure. So for instance, if you are within a family and you want harm to stop, but you love the person that's harming you, and you know what those consequences may be for you and your family, you are less likely to report what's happening to you. It focuses scarce resources predominantly on the author of the harm and not the person who is experiencing it. It creates isolation and shame. Well, let's make some connections here for those who are subject to registries. These are the same feelings that people who have been victimized are feeling as well. So we're creating isolation and shame and secrecy for everyone. The registries create instability in housing and employment and create significant barriers to economic stability, the ability to meet your economic needs. So what are the things that people who have survived harm report that they actually need? They are reporting that they need to be believed. They're reporting that they need to be acknowledged that harm actually happened to them. They want empowerment and self-determination. I know that was really important for me on my journey. Answers and truth-telling, accountability, physical safety, but that's what we all want, right? Assurance that this won't happen to anyone else. And most importantly, resources, safe housing, job retraining, culturally sensitive therapeutic support, and economic support for lost wages. So those are things that people who have experienced harm are asking for. Let me think. Do registries provide any of these things for survivors? All right, you can say it. No. All right. So let's talk about what the criminal legal system and registries actually provide for survivors. Cross-examination, questioning of their experience, immediate denial and minimization, not necessarily because somebody wants to, but for self-preservation. There's no in-between. It's this or that, right? Powerlessness and no control in the process, poor communication, a lack of voice, no space for actual meaningful accountability, knowledge without context, and registries are great for that. Let's terrify everybody about somebody because they're dangerous, even though they've gone through so much rehabilitation. They've turned their lives around. They present no danger. But if I'm a person who's been victimized and I'm living in a community and somebody on the registry moves in next door to me, now my life is overcome with fear because I'm being told that that person is dangerous, when in fact, they are not or may not be. So when we talk about what registries deliver to society, they're draining economic resources. They're creating a sense of fear and panic, instability for people in reentry, collateral consequences to families. Again, pointing to that exposure to the things that cause people to decompensate and their lives to be deeply impacted. So now you're talking about spouses, children, mothers, fathers, all the people in those people's lives experiencing consequences that may restart the cycle, right? Generational trauma, homelessness, a false sense of security, vigilante justice, and an expansion of over-policing and mass incarceration, which people are extremely concerned with until you say, oh, well, the conviction registries and the entire regime around that is contributing to that. Oh, well, that's fine. So we need to be making those connections in our advocacy and in our coffee table conversations. So that sounded all really heavy, and now everybody's like, oh, I thought you were supposed to inspire me, Amber. Like, oh my God, help. All right, so now we're going to get to the part where we actually know, like, what's the solution to all this? Oh my gosh, well, if we know it's not registries, what is it? That is part of it. So there are some different approaches that we can take. And so sexual violence and sexual harm in our country is a public health issue. And so we can take a public health approach. In fact, the Centers for Disease Control actually have a whole chart about what we can and should be doing to stop sexual violence. And it's promoting social norms that protect against violence. So that's bystander approaches, mobilizing men and boys as allies, providing information and education to people. And I would also argue that everybody should be an ally because women are not the only people that experience sexual violence. Teach skills to prevent sexual violence, so that's social emotional learning, talking about healthy relationships, teaching particularly our young children how to be sexual beings in the world in a safe way, in an age-appropriate way. Promoting healthy sexuality, not making everything so secretive, not putting it under the rug. Empowerment-based training. Also providing opportunities to empower people, particularly girls and women, because there is a higher prevalence in that community. Strengthening economic supports, strengthening leadership and opportunities. Also creating protective environments. So when we talk about like the environments that we're creating, particularly in institutions, right? So let's not pretend that the prison is not a place where sexual violence occurs, all right? So if we're creating power imbalances in institutions like prisons and nursing homes and schools and churches and all of those things and expecting sexual violence to not occur, then we might be doing the wrong thing. So improving safety and monitoring, and I know monitoring, it can be a trigger word, that just means like maybe we don't have situations where teachers and students are like alone together after school, okay? So establishing and consistently applying workplace policies that go against people not reporting sexual harassment, sexual violence, things like that. Addressing community level risks through environmental approaches. And also support for people who have experienced harm. So that's services, that's treatment, that is all of those things that survivors have said, this is what I need in my life in order to move forward and heal. Another approach is restorative justice. And so restorative justice is a mechanism whereby you ask a different set of questions than our adversarial criminal legal system asks. You're asking what harm has occurred rather than what law was broken and how can we punish someone. What harm has occurred? Who did it happen to? And what obligations were created because of this harm? And that might include the person who caused harm. It would include the person who experienced the harm, members of the community who may have been aware or complicit or affected, and bringing all of those people together in a safe space that values every member of the community and coming to reparative agreements so that people can move forward with their humanity intact. And what is found is that people who participate in restorative justice processes, they're getting the answers. So again, going back to what people have said that they need, right? They need answers. They need truth-telling. They're looking for meaningful accountability. And so for someone who has caused harm, when you are ripped from society, you're thrown into prison, you're made to do, your autonomy from body to mind to everywhere is stripped from you, you're thinking about what victimization, which is real victimization, I think we can agree on that, is happening to you. You're in a space in your body and heart and mind and mental space that you are surviving, but you are not experiencing a meaningful, it's happening to you. You are not an active participant. So restorative justice allows for a mechanism for someone to participate in that type of process that holds everyone in humanity, encourages reintegration into the community, and works towards what the person who was harmed actually needs. And finally, transformative justice is a political framework for responding to violence, harm, and abuse in communities. It really focuses more on systems than it does the interpersonal harm. So it does not rely on the state, so that might be police, prisons, the criminal legal system, ICE, foster care, all of those state systems that can cause harm to folks. It doesn't reinforce or perpetuate violence such as oppressive norms, revenge, vigilantism, and actively cultivates things known to prevent violence, such as healing, accountability, resilience, violence disruption, conflict resolution, and safety for everyone involved. So the registry and its related sanctions, when we are talking to people about it, there is an inclination to really focus about the injustices that are happening to a person who is experiencing the registry. And that is very, very real, it's personal, and it can be an effective way to storytell. But at the end of the day, when we frame the problem as the sexual violence itself, and the registry as a part of that problem, that is actually counterproductive to what it is that we're trying to accomplish as a society for a problem that affects not just registered people, but everyone. Everyone in our society knows somebody who has been harmed, whether it's by the criminal legal system, or it's by another person, or it's by an institution. And if we're all working together, rather than in silos, to tear that down, we can bring more people into the fight. So it will require education, legal action, legislative advocacy. It will always must center those directly impacted by the issues. And when we talk about the issues, we're talking about the entirety of sexual cycles of harm and systemic harm that is a result of us trying to respond to it in a just crazy way. So that systemic harm, registries, onerous probation, government surveillance, tearing down of people's civil liberties, putting people in a class that have them existing outside of the constitutional protections that everyone else enjoys. All of that is the problem, and we need to address all of it. So connecting it to being directly connected to the fight against mass incarceration, criminalization, and government control, and require justice-minded allies of all backgrounds and fields to join us, this really requires a public narrative shift. And those folks who are impacted by the registry or who have caused harm, because sometimes those are different people because the system sweeps people into it many different ways, are a very, very important part of violence disruption and solving the problem. And each one of us in this room can be a part of that. So, I mean, that is really the extent of my presentation. I'm happy to take any questions if anybody wants questions. I don't know if I'm on time, early, late, whatever. I'm early, yay, I just went with it. But I'm happy to take questions if any folks have any.
Amber, why don't I join you, because I didn't have time for questions if people want.
Yeah, I think that would be good.
Okay.
All right, anybody have questions? Gentleman in the front.
All of these programs are information gathering and acting together. However, we have laws that restrict confidentiality. Is that going to be a problem?
So that's a really good question. So for those who didn't hear it, the question was, all of these programs are about information gathering, but there are laws that protect confidentiality, and also I would go a step further and say contact between people, things like that. How does that affect that? So just to be clear, there are multiple different ways that you address the issue. So because we're Restorative Action Alliance, people think that we only believe in restorative justice. That is not the solution for every situation, nor can it be with our current system. You can't jam restorative justice, which is a very voluntary process, into a system that is adversarial. So sometimes they can't necessarily work together, but restorative practices are a spectrum of practices, so that might look like vicarious restorative justice. So that means somebody who has caused the same type of harm that a person has experienced may be able to come in contact and provide some context and some healing work, but they may not be able to have contact with the person who actually harmed them. Or there are other sort of, you may have experienced some of these things where there will be panels where people can hear from people who survived harm so that they can understand some of the impacts that it has on them. So there is a spectrum. And then, again, there is also people who have caused harm being able to be brave and vulnerable to tell their stories, to say, this is where I was at when I caused harm. I have done this, that, this, the other, everything. I've done my dance, and I have healed, and I want to see healing for everyone, and registries are preventing me from doing that. So I don't know if that was a good answer, but that's the answer I have. Question in the back, Michael.
Thank you. So do you have on your website or anything, any materials or helps for people who are trying to point out to legislators and things like that, the kind of things you were talking about in terms of solutions to the problem rather than
So yes, if you visit our website, it's restorativeactionalliance.org. You can find some resources there. You can find some prevention resources. You can find some videos. We also have a podcast, which is called Amplified Voices, and we have had individuals who are registry impacted as well as people who have experienced harm on the podcast, so that's a good resource. We also have a YouTube channel where we do webinars. Our last webinar was really, really great about preventing childhood sexual abuse. And so there are a lot of resources. And Restorative Action Alliance is not the only organization out there providing those resources, but you can certainly visit our website and others to really incorporate this thinking and this information into your messaging as you move ahead.
I had a question. What does one say to a legislator or whomever you're educating when I say the reoffense rate is very, very low? Any offense is horrible. We should just work against any offense. How do you combat that?
So you turn the accountability back on the legislator. You say, what we know is that to break cycles of sexual harm, we need to provide healing for everyone. And you say to that legislator, if you were a person who wanted to end sexual violence, you would consider the very nuance and complexity of this issue, because the registry is counterproductive to ending sexual violence. There is no evidence that shows that it prevents it, and what we hear from survivors is that it causes fear and they are not receiving the services that they need. And it siphons resources from what survivors actually need. So turn it back on the legislator. I mean, you always want to be respectful or whatnot, but legislators expect so much accountability from our community. And so I will often say to someone, we appreciate accountability. We want meaningful accountability, and we want the same from you.
Hi, I'm Madeline. I'm from Connecticut and a family member, an affected family member. Mine is a comment. I've done some research and found a very interesting study by an anthropologist of where is there the least likelihood of sexual harm, and it's in communities where women are not only equal but have leadership. So I really feel that part of our job is to ally with the F-word feminist movement.
So I have to say that I love that comment, and I will say that I identify as a feminist. There are a lot of different types of feminism, and what I don't subscribe to is carceral feminism. And so you are exactly right. When we uplift women and we equalize our relationships in our society, then we will be on our way to having healthy relationships. And there's no place for sexual harm when you're having healthy relationships. So thank you so much for that comment. You're exactly right. Any other questions? Any questions for Janice?
I have a comment or two.
All right.
I always have something to say.
Me too.
Yeah. Amber and I are not sure on words. And that's a good thing, right? Because
That's
we're
right.
not-
Woohoo!
So, I'm not sure that I said this, or if I did, maybe I didn't emphasize it. So, in the case of Smith versus Doe, the attorney for the state of Alaska was John Roberts. Okay, this is the same John Roberts who's now Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court. All right, so in the past 2 years at the vigil, I have basically pointed my finger at John Roberts, who wasn't really there, but figuratively speaking, and say, John Roberts, you made this mess, now you need to clean it up. Think about it. He is the Chief Justice of the court, right? The court they make decisions all the time about what cases they're going to review. They review very few of them. Like, I think it's down to 3% of the cases that come knocking at their door. Hey, we want you to review our decision. They don't do it, okay? But they can, and guess who's got the most discretion on the court is the Chief Justice. So I think we really need to engage him and say, John Roberts, you made this mess. Now you need to clean it up. So one of the things you're going to see tomorrow is dustpans, believe it or not. So I have this fantasy for next year. We're just having dustpans. Next year that we have a dustpan like doodah parade thing going on. So anybody who wants to be part of the dustpan drill team next year, let me know. I don't have those talents and abilities, but we need somebody. Another thing is today during the lunch break, it's not going to take an entire hour to eat lunch in the same room. Okay, we have some materials here, and materials are so you can make your own poster. Okay, so the posters behind us are the posters we used last year, and by the way, I have another set of them. So, you know, and we're going to take them to the site. You don't have to take them, but the fact is we have poster boards and we have markers, and we're encouraging you all to be creative and make your own poster. I mean, the things
Those are
that
the
we
best
said
kind.
are important. And one of the things I hope that you notice is the theme going on. We're wrapping ourselves in the American flag. So when I gave my Have a Dream speech, I talked about the Constitution, right? We are in the right here. We are on the correct side of history. Those other people are not, including the U.S. Supreme Court. So we need to be seen as mainstream because we are mainstream, right? And so many people out there actually agree with what we have to say, but they're afraid to say it, okay? So, you know, again, language, remember the two words, recidivism and reoffense, and please erase recidivism from your vocabulary. Well, another one has to do with the term sex offender. I do not use the term sex offender, okay? And I hope you don't either, okay? You're a person who's forced to register. You're a registrant, whatever, you know, the term that you feel most comfortable with. Well, folks, we have a chance to change the language here, right? And so when I'm filing my lawsuits, I use the term sex offender usually once. And then I put parentheses, registrant, okay? Because if I said person required to register, they can't remember that much. Just say registrant. And it's amazing that the judges, basically, when they write their decisions, they use the term registrant and they don't use the term sex offender. So we have control here. We need to take control and we need to talk to people. So, you know, one of the things I think about is like, okay, with the gay movement, how is it that they accomplish so much, right? I mean, and I have a daughter who's part of the LGBTQ community and all those other initials, and stuff. And you know, she still doesn't understand. She doesn't understand the similarities between that movement and our movement. And it's okay. She'll wake up someday. I keep feeding her information. Anyway, someday she's going to wake up, and the whole society. But the thing is, most people in our society today think that a person required to register, and Amber said it, and I'll repeat it, has basically, raped a dozen children. And in California, you can end up on the sex offender registry because you took a leak behind a sports bar on Super Bowl Sunday. I mean, that's it, public indecency. And we have long stretches of highway on Interstate 5 where there's restrooms are few and far between. And men, especially older men, they might have a prostate issue or whatever, the frequent urination, blah, blah, blah. Well, and they do their best not to expose themselves. And I don't know what it is. There must be some really people with prurient interests, I guess, who are taking pictures of them basically taking a leak on the side of the freeway. What? Who gives a darn, right? I mean, if they were just, okay, I'm going to be crass, weenie waggers, I mean, that's one thing, right? But they're not. They're just basically taking care of a basic biological need. Okay, I guess in Europe, they just do it on the sidewalk. At least we don't do that in the United States that I know of, because it's just not hygienic as far as I'm concerned. But,
Have you
folks,
been to New York?
what was that?
Have you been to New York?
Yeah, but fortunately, well, no, that's not true. What am I saying? Okay, so yeah,
Sorry.
New York City is its own animal. But folks, again, we have control. We need to take control, okay? And one of the reasons that the LGBTQIA and more initials that I don't know yet was successful is people told their stories, right? And that when I see people on the registry and listen to their stories and stuff, the people that seem to be the most successful are people who, like, their neighbors knew who they were before they went on the registry, right? They knew who they were, and they knew that they're not this label. So, we're crazy. We're a crazy society. We from time to time we pick scapegoats, right? We pick scapegoats. So one of the Supreme Court decisions I didn't mention is Korematsu, and that's with a K. So in Korematsu, the U.S. Supreme Court said it was okay to put people who were U.S. citizens of Japanese descent in internment camps. All right. When I was in law school, the parents of my roommate of Japanese descent, as was my roommate, they were in those camps. And I'm not of Japanese descent, but it still bugs the crap out of me, because who knows? As I said, maybe it's us caffeine drinkers next, whoever's in line. I mean, come on, folks. And there's a great quote out there. I wish I could remember it. Maybe somebody in this room does remember about the labor unions and stuff like that. And they took this group and then they took that group and nobody spoke up. Well, what is it going to take? What is it going to take? And by the way, the Korematsu was not overturned by the court. It's still on the books, but it was overturned by executive order. But people were ripped out of their homes and they were sent to these camps with nothing, practically nothing. And the other thing I compare, and I've gotten probably the most grief, people like, well, Janice, you've been doing this for 15 years, who has, caused you grief? I don't think anybody's caused me grief, because I'll tell you what, at this point in time in my life, I don't care what anybody else thinks of me. But the Jewish community, believe it or not, because I was accurately quoted in the Los Angeles Times as saying, this reminds me of Nazi Germany. Okay, it does. I'm not Jewish, but for some reason I've been fascinated with Judaism and the Holocaust. I've been to actually one of the camps in Germany. I mean, folks, you just don't know what's coming next, right? Are you going to be, well, some people have already been ripped out of their houses, right? Lost their businesses, Frank Lindsay. All right, can I tell your story? So Frank Lindsay had a storefront business selling water. Now that's controversial, right? Selling water. So anyway, purified water. But his landlord, once the landlord found out he was on the registry, refused to renew his lease and told Frank that somebody else wanted to lease that property, which was total bullshit. The place was vacant for 3 years. So, 4 years. Okay, so that businessman, he was willing to accept that financial harm of not leasing to Frank Lindsay, right? And the rest of Frank Lindsay's story really throw your hair.
No, I just wanted to add one quick comment to add to what Janice's great comments. Can you hear me? I'm so short. It's crazy. I thought it was adjusted to me. Okay. So this brings to mind for me the idea of intersectionality, right? So Janice was talking about the LGBTQ rights movement. There are comparisons to people who were oppressed in Nazi Germany. And so the truth of the matter is, again, as I said in my presentation, sexual violence and registries affects every single person in our country, on the face of the earth. It's a problem. And so it does affect disproportionately members of the LGBTQIA community. It does affect people who are of the Jewish faith and heritage. It affects Black people. It affects people who are socioeconomically depressed because we have no social safety net. So the idea that a movement belongs to this group or that group or whatever, there is a certain group that has more privilege and power to show up to advocacy, but we can change that. So we need to do the work necessary in order to bring people to become mainstream, as Janice was saying, to say this is not only a problem for everyone, it is also up to everyone to play a role in the movement. So that's my thought. Oh, lots of questions.
I was just curious about the education aspect. Is there a, like Finkelhorn and Brown traumagenics model? Like, what, as far as education for prevention, is there a model that's being used, for that balance?
So there are multiple models for prevention. The problem is, and as this relates to advocacy, nobody's trying to fund that. They're trying to fund registries, and they're trying to fund prisons, and they're trying to fund all of those things. So when we talk about the different approaches, there are many great programs out there that are trying to teach young men how to be vulnerable and process their emotions and not act out in a violent way. There are programs that teach young people how to understand what consent is. All of those things exist, and it's the small grassroots organizations and people like people in this room that are trying to develop those programs. And meanwhile, our government is like, no, I'm sorry, I don't really want to do that. We want to punish the people and get them away from us, and we're solving the problem because it's easy. Prevention is hard, and that's why.
Well, yeah, so thank you, Kathleen. So not only is it's lucrative, it's financially advantageous.
Thank you.
Like our Department of Corrections that basically runs the parole program.
Cutting it off.
They get the more money, the more people who are on parole, the more money they get. Okay? And oh, by the way, in addition to that, there are treatment providers who are getting paid. In addition to that, there are polygraphers who are getting paid. So they do not want their rice bowls to be broken, right? They're really happy sitting there eating rice or whatever the heck they're eating. I think it's poison personally. But, and in California, and I'm just guessing it's the same in many states, is for a long time, our Department of Corrections got away with shit, right? And there was nobody to push back. Now there is, okay? And I'm one of the litigators, but there are litigators in other states as well. And by the way, if you ever want an attorney in your state, call me. And I have my business cards here and everything. I don't have all 50 states covered yet, but I'm working on it, okay? And so there are people out there who are doing this. And here's a recent example. I caught our Department of Corrections breaking the law. What do you know? So the law had to do with how long does a person on parole have to undergo treatment. And this is really important because if you're undergoing treatment, you will not get early discharge from parole. Think about it. Okay, CDCR is requiring you to be on treatment. When it gets to BPH about whether or not to discharge you from parole, they won't discharge you from parole because you're undergoing treatment. The bastards, right? And why? They're all sitting there, pigs at the trough, snorting and farting and whatever else they can do, and just gobble, 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 you know, they just love you, because guess what? They get paid for torturing you.
Janice, we have a question. We have a question in the back. And we have 5 more minutes, so like probably 3 questions.
Okay.
1, 2, 3.
For you, something I always like tell my friends, one of the big problems is normal society isn't waking up in the morning and be like, you know, who needs more rules to help with sex offenders? Like, that's just not the thing. We are, but so how do we, like, I feel like when I meet someone, their views on sex offenders or registrants change. So how do we kind of spread that message and actually reach like a wider audience than just our little kind of bubble?
I feel like there's a lot of different ways and there's a lot of different messaging, and it really depends on who you're speaking with, right? So if you're speaking to like a civil rights attorney, like our friend Janice, you're going to be talking about the egregious civil rights and human rights violations that are happening to people. If you're speaking to a legislator, you might want to go a little broader and start talking about how sexual violence affects everyone and how they need to get serious about fixing it. So I think that there are many messages, and we need everybody's voice, but we really need to start honing in on different messages for different audiences. If you're talking to somebody who cares about homelessness, you can say, you know what? There are people who have died in the cold because they couldn't find housing. So that's what that person cares about. But it's an immense amount of work, but we've seen it start to be effective in different spaces. So I know John, we said 3, so I know John, and then we've got Ellen over here, and I'm really sorry, but we do have a unity panel, so there'll be opportunity for questions then. John.
Yeah, good morning. Since Janice has normalized
Swearing.
swearing, I feel that we are living in a fucking dystopian, like, insanity right now in this country. And
Might go in our
so
favor.
my question is for Amber, because Amber will solve this in the next 2 minutes.
No, I will not.
When you mentioned, people who are homeless. Well, a ton more people are homeless because of what's going on, not just because they're in the registry. People cannot get jobs, not just because they're on the registry, but because there are no jobs to be had. And people in the LGBTQ community are being erased because of policies happening across this country, not just because they're on the registry. So how do we move forward as a movement, as policy and legislative, when there's so much other like oppressing, terrible awfulness happening around us, that it is not a legislator's top priority to deal with this right now, because they've got 80% of their constituents calling them because of some issue.
That's a really excellent question. And
2 minutes to fix it.
Yeah, okay, I can't fix it in 2 minutes or in 20 years probably, but we're gonna try. So for those who don't know me, my day job is that I work for the ACLU. And so what we saw in the recent era is that people got really galvanized. And really, right now, that is our line of defense against people that don't care about laws, don't care about courts, don't care about anything, right? And so actually, this moment is an opportunity to connect our issues to all of those other things that people are so damn mad about. They're mad that their civil liberties are being taken away. They're mad about their data privacy. If there was ever a data privacy problem, it might be the registry. So connecting all of these things to those things that people are so damn mad about right now that they took for granted and thought would always be there in our democracy, this is the moment to do that.
Recidivism is not good and
So recidivism means returning to custody for any reason whatsoever. So earlier I was talking about a client who had a souvenir baseball bat and his probation officer tried to violate him because, quote, he had a toy. That's not a toy, folks. Okay, another one because he downloaded Angry Birds on his phone. That's part of recidivism. And recidivism rate is over 90% in California for a registrant on parole. Over 90%. Okay, they're going to be this flash incarceration nonsense, blah, 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 go back to jail. It's usually jail for 5 days or something like that. Slap the hand, don't do that anymore. Reoffense rate is committing another sex offense. And supposedly what the society cares about and what they think about and the stupid assumption that they make is everybody on the registry is going to do it again. That's reoffense rate. And again, in California, the reoffense rate is less than 1%. 90% less than 1%, which our word you use is important. Please use reoffense.
Yeah, Janice is exactly right there, but I do want to say one thing. When you're speaking with legislators, researchers, general public, all of those things, they use the words interchangeably. So part of our job is also to educate people on what things mean, right? And so it is true that different agencies track things differently and call things different things. They might call it recidivism, they might call it return to prison, they might call it reoffense rate, they might call it any, Bozo the Clown. They do whatever they want. So the critical question to ask is, how was that measured? And what does that mean? Can you explain to me how that data is collected? So like when we were talking about reporting rates, it's self-reported for most things. So again, it's really important, and our researchers in the room will say, like, it matters how the methodology with which you're reporting on statistics and data. So that's my...
Sweet.
He's like, now get off the stage.
Get off the stage. Everyone give a round of applause for Janice and Amber, please. Just a few minutes early, which is great. I'm always late. So,
Fine, early.
We're doing good on time. I want to talk a little bit about first-person language because we kind of touched on that. A lot of people use that term sex offender. I hate it. That is a term that's like you're actively so committing crimes. So, me, I'm a person forced to register. I don't go to the sheriff's office. Hey, I'm not here today. Here's your $50. I'll stamp my pass and let you go. So I love first-person language because I'm not a sex offender. I'm a person that committed a mistake 15, 20 years ago. Today I'm a father, I'm a business person, I'm a husband. So I really encourage people to never use that language, ever. All we do is demeaning ourselves. I mean, we are not the worst things we've